What's up, everyone? I am Brian, and today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite cars that I've ever personally owned, the McLaren MP4-12C. Now, this is a bit of a bittersweet day for me. I'm actually planning to sell this car if everything goes according to plan with my next purchase. But my next purchase is actually very much in the same vein. It is going to be a McLaren. I am going to save it for the big reveal because it is a special car. And let's just say the fact that it is a special car is the only reason that I'm actually willing to let this one go, because this is a very special car in its own right. Now, I had been meaning to make this video for a very long time. I had wanted to do it up the way I did my Porsche 996 video, but unfortunately, or very fortunately, I have a 20-month-old amazing daughter, Lana, at home, and she's commandeered most of my time.
Do you want to beep beep? You want to put on Daddy's hat?
The fact that I'm selling this car has kind of forced me out here to make this video, but I am a one-man crew at the moment, so I don't have anyone else to shoot any B-roll of the car driving around or anything like that. This really is, in essence, a parting love letter to a car that I have very much enjoyed, and I want to share that experience with you. When I first bought this car about 7 years ago, I had cross-shopped it against a Ferrari F430, and I'll be honest, the F430 was a case of never meet your heroes. It was a red car, it was stunningly gorgeous to look at, but it was honestly, in my opinion, terrible to drive. And the biggest reason for that was the F1 transmission. It was just so slow and so clunky, and it really made the car, in my opinion, unbearable to drive. I'm sure it was great at the time, but I was looking at this car in 2017, and I think that the sophistication and quality of transmissions, especially with the advent of dual clutch transmissions, really just left that car in the dust. Now, after test driving the Ferrari, I went to the local McLaren dealership, McLaren San Francisco. Shout out to all the people there that have helped me over the years, especially Naveen and Dan. And I test drove this car, and it was a revelation. This car is mind-bogglingly good compared to most other cars out there. It is a proper supercar. It's got 616 horsepower in a twin-turbo V8 that has a flat plane crank and a red line of 8,500 RPM. Now, I've heard feedback from other people who have test-driven these cars, and they say there is a lot of turbo lag. Now, that is very true if you try to drive this like you would most normal cars. But I come from a motorcycle background. I've ridden motorcycles since I was 11 years old. I have 3 in my garage right now. And this is the first car I've ever driven that reminded me of the performance and experience and thrill that you get riding a motorcycle. The power to weight ratio is just absolutely bonkers. The way that you need to drive this car with the engine is very reminiscent of keeping a motorcycle kind of in the right rev range in the power band. If you keep this car at, say, 4,500 to 5,500 RPM on the low side, and you run it up to 7,500, 8,000, 8,000 plus RPM, you just have an absolute blast. And you couple that with a weight that comes in right around 3,100 pounds, a carbon fiber tub chassis that is both incredibly safe and very lightweight, you have the recipe, in my opinion, for the best bang for the buck performance supercar out there, coming in at a price point of $125,000 that I paid for it 7 years ago, and an even better value today at what I'm probably gonna let it go for, which we'll just call ballpark $100,000. Now, this car had a reputation from the moment that it was released that unfortunately has stuck with it in a negative way, and I think that's part of the reason for the values that you see today. A lot of people, when they reviewed this car, compared it directly to the Ferrari 458, and that's partly McLaren's fault. They basically said themselves that that was the gold standard that they were trying to beat, and they believed that they had beat it. And this, in my opinion, is part of the story of this car that is going to make it a long-term true classic, because this is a car that was purpose-built by an F1 team in their technology center. This car is the unadulterated essence of what F1 engineers would have wanted in a passenger vehicle. And so when they compared it to the 458 internally, they probably just thought, as an F1 team should, forget your feelings, we want this car to be fast. It has to be faster than the 458 in every measurable metric. And it was. This car is a beast. This car is incredibly quick. This car, when it came out, set lap records, and 10 years on, it was still among some of the fastest cars out there. Now, part of the issue is it really needs to be in skilled hands to get the best out of it. And one of the complaints is that you can't necessarily get a consistent lap time. I think one of the biggest issues is that the electrical Nannys were not quite as refined as they could have been, which really isn't surprising given that this was the first true actual production car out of McLaren Automotive, basically ever. And so really, as a first effort, this car was valiant. It is an incredible feat as the first production car out of the box. The problem is everybody tried to compare it to a 458, and a 458 is a very refined production car that is lauded even today. So when you set the bar so high and then you don't meet it, you leave everyone with a bad taste in their mouth. When really, if people had just objectively evaluated this as the first effort out of McLaren Automotive, and not something that was even trying to be like the 458 in terms of what it was, but unique in its own right, I think they would have come away incredibly impressed. Now, again, I think part of the history of this car that people are going to come to value in time is the fact that it doesn't really care about your feelings. It was purpose-built to be fast, and that means it perhaps is not quite as enjoyable or visceral from an end-user experience as reviewers maybe would have liked. Now, I am not a car reviewer, I am not a race car driver, I am a car enthusiast, and I find this car incredibly entertaining and supremely capable in so many different respects. If you view this as a supercar that can also be an incredibly great grand tourer, then I think now you've opened the door to what this car truly is and how magnificent it can be. I can take this car to the racetrack, I can drive it 2 hours to the racetrack in comfort as if I was in my commuter vehicle. I can go out there and hoon for an entire afternoon, and I can come back in the comfort of this car again. The seats in this car, incredibly comfortable. This car on the highway in 7th gear, unbelievable gas mileage, very composed and quiet and reserved, no droning in my ears or anything like that. But at the same time, I could throw it in manual, I could keep the revs north of 5,000, and I can have fun all day long in this thing. Now, the car that I am buying is much more visceral, and one of the downsides of that is it's not nearly as comfortable. If I need to drive an hour, hour and a half to go out to Car Week or even just go to a local Cars and Coffee, I would rather be in this thing. I'm not even joking. The contortion that I need to do to get into the new car and how stuck I am in it once I'm in it is not something that I'm actually looking forward to. It's just everything else about this other car that makes it special that is the reason for the upgrade. But if I actually cared about the day-to-day, everyday experience for how I realistically use a car, it doesn't get much better than this. A couple other things about this car, perhaps the most special feature to me. My dad has a 1963 split window Corvette, and at the time, the designers loved it. And once it hit the market, people realized that having this bar in the middle of the rear glass really obstructed your view. And by the next model year, they had pulled the bar out. And as we all know, the 63 split window vet is perhaps the most iconic Corvette as a result. This car has a very split window-esque feature in the swipe doors. Now, for those of you that don't know, the swipe doors basically on this car mean there is no button. You have to gently caress the underside of the door in the right spot and it will magically pop open for you. It's honestly fantastic. I love it. When this hit the showrooms, people couldn't figure out how to operate the mechanism. Salespeople couldn't get the doors open for clients. Clients couldn't get the door open when they're out in public. Just very embarrassing sort of stuff. Really, everybody just needed a proper education, because if you know where to place your hand and how to move it, it will work for you consistently every single time. And so there was a huge flurry of backlash, and what I view as a similar overreaction to what happened with the split window 63 Corvette. By the next model year, 2013, McLaren had replaced the swipe door with a button. And I think that anecdote basically tells the story of this car and why it is going to be so special in the future, because this was the unadulterated vision of an F1 team. Screw the bean counters, screw the salespeople. This car is what they wanted. Swipe doors are cool, let's do it. Yeah, we're gonna do it. Why not, right? And the bureaucracy that infiltrates every car manufacturer eventually waters this sort of thing down. So there is something special in the DNA of this car fundamentally that manifests itself in things like the swipe doors, but is true throughout the entire design and purpose of this car. And that's what makes this car so special, and in my opinion, absolutely a future classic. The one other thing about this car that is worth noting is the hydraulic suspension. It took some getting used to. I actually do get motion sick, more so than most people. If I'm on a boat, I actually get very motion sick. And driving this car for the first time really kind of brought back those feelings, because each corner is actually independent and it can kind of soak up bumps independently. And that feeling of kind of crosstalk that you get with traditional suspension setups, when you hit a bump on one side and it kind of disrupts the whole chassis across to the other side, doesn't happen with this car. People that have driven this car call it a magic suspension. Having owned this car for 7 years and put roughly 9,000 miles on it, it absolutely is, but it takes some getting used to. It's very different than a conventional suspension setup, but the more that you drive it, at least for me, the more I've come to truly appreciate it. It really does just smooth out the road and kind of let you focus on the greater purpose. It also lets you adjust it dynamically between normal, performance, and track. And there is a wide gamut of kind of comfort to performance available throughout that range. So like I said, if you want this to be a grand tourer, you throw it in normal and you just sit back and relax. And if you want to go have fun at the track, you throw it into track mode, and now you have a lot firmer, a lot stiffer suspension. And it still does its magic of kind of erasing imperfections in the road anyway. One of the biggest benefits of this from a performance perspective that I actually noted at the McLaren Artura Autocross is in the Autocross there's a section where you have to do basically a U-turn at speed. And in the Artura, I mean, it was my first time in the car, so I'm not gonna fault the car so much as my lack of experience with it. It was very hard for me to be consistent through that U-turn because with a traditional suspension setup, when you're braking hard, there is significant nosedive. Now, I ran my car on that autocross track after, and I was far more consistent and faster, and I think primarily through that U-turn area, because the car is just planted. There is no nosedive at all. You can basically just take the corner and you can feel what the front end is gonna do, and you're not having to fight this other piece of the puzzle that is the nosedive. If I had more laps in the Artura, I would have continued to improve this time, but instead I got to switch over to my own car, the McLaren 12C, where I continued to improve my lap times until I got the 12C to a 30.1, and then the day was over. So it is a magic suspension. It is a huge technological feat of this car, and it's amazing that this whole thing came out as a singular package back in 2012. All right, I'm not gonna lie, I thought I was done, but as I was wrapping up shooting some B-roll, some final thoughts came to mind that I didn't mention. The styling. The styling on this car was a bit controversial when it came out as well. A lot of people felt it was a bit too muted, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm included in that group. I remember seeing this car at the San Jose Auto Show and really not even giving it a second look because I thought it felt just a little bit too boring for a supercar. I think in hindsight, 12 years on, this car is aging absolutely beautifully. It is so unique in its styling, but it's also so fresh and contemporary. I feel like at this point, it's never going to actually look bad, and I think that's a good thing. The butterfly doors are also fantastic. I love that the doors open up, and honestly, it's just one of those things that I've gotten so used to that at this point, I can't buy a replacement for this car that has traditional doors. It's just a no-go for me. Finally, the carbon tub on this, it's a first generation. A lot of people found this car a little bit clunky and hard to get into and out of. It is a little bit hard. Again, if you don't know the process that kind of works the best thing to do is just sit on the sill like it's a bench, because it is. You actually can put your butt here, kind of get situated, tuck yourself in, and then you can go ahead and put your feet in like that. No fuss, no drama, but it's not just a one-step procedure. As difficult as this car is to get into and out of, it's actually easier than the one that I am purchasing, and it actually, in my opinion, gives this car a sense of occasion. When you're seated in this thing, you feel like you're in the cockpit of a space shuttle, and that's a good thing when you're buying a special car like this. All right, I'm sure that with all of the great memories that I've had of this car, many, many more things will pop to my mind that I wish I could share. I can only remember so much in the moment. I think the takeaway here is this car has been an absolute joy to own and drive. The experiences, the memories that I've had with this car, the friends that I've made are going to last a lifetime. Absolutely worth the cost of entry, and I highly recommend this if you're considering one for yourself. This is an unapologetic, purpose-built race car for the street made by an exacting group of people that have the F1 pedigree to prove it. All that for about $100,000. What are you waiting for? And that's all I've got for this one. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you, and I will see you at the next one soon.